Welcome to the training for MySJSU Messaging. MySJSU Messaging is a method of sending messages to students using Oracle PeopleSoft. Messaging is built using PeopleSoft's worklist capabilities. Worklist is a behind-the-scenes function that allows you to assign tasks to users. In this case, the task is a message assigned to the student. Reading or deleting the task is considered completing it. Students can view their messages by signing in to MySJSU and going to the Student Center. At the top of the Student Center, they'll see their received messages, and we'll look at this a little later on. There are advantages and drawbacks to using messaging over email. Let's look at each of these. Benefits to using MySJSU Messaging. You can see if and when a student has read a message. That means that after you send out a message to a group of students, you can later go in to View Message Recipients and see everyone that's read it, and when. This can be helpful for confirming that your communication with the student was successful. If you notice that the message that you sent to a student has an error, or if the information changes after you send that message out, you can unsend the message, making sure that the student will no longer be able to see it and view incorrect information. Once the content of a message is no longer relevant, you can have that message expire. Then the message will no longer be visible in the Student Center. You don't need to know a student's email address or other contact information to send them a message. You can message students based on their SJSU IDs. This can be especially helpful if you're attempting to message a large group of students with results you've downloaded from a query or report. We try to keep the signal-to-noise ratio for messaging very high. That means that we discourage departments from using MySJSU Messaging for general, untargeted announcements or for advertising things that may not be important to that specific student at that time. This way, when students receive a message through MySJSU, they know that it contains important information and they know they need to sign in and read it right away. However, messaging does have limitations. There are times when email might be better. Messaging isn't immediate. When you send a message to a student, if they happen to be signed into MySJSU and looking at their Student Center, then they may see that they've received a message. But if they're not signed in, they won't receive that notification until later that night. Around 11 o'clock each night, ITS runs a job that finds all the students who have received a new message for that day and sends them an email alerting them to the fact that they've received a message in MySJSU and they should sign in and read it, and giving them instructions of how to do so. So if you're attempting to communicate information that would be relevant that same day, for example, an instructor calling in sick, email or other contact methods are probably better. But if you're fine waiting a day for the student to have that notification that there is a new message, then MySJSU Messaging is appropriate. You can't use messaging to contact faculty, staff, or alumni, current and future students only. While the system will allow you to send that message, faculty, staff, and alumni do not have any way to sign in and read it. So they'll receive a notification that they've received a message, but will have no ability to find out what that message is. Then they call the help desk, and then you'll probably get a call letting you know that your message went out to people who can't receive that message. Messaging is plain text only. This means that special characters, such as those used by many word processors, such as Microsoft Office, will not render properly in the message. It also means that you cannot bold, italicize, or underline parts of the message. In addition, you cannot include attachments or have clickable links inside that message. There are 2 fields for clickable URLs at the bottom of the message, so you can use those to link students to a website or a place where they can download an attachment, but you cannot include those in the message itself. Finally, as I mentioned on the previous slide, messaging must be relevant to a student's academic success in some way. That means that when they receive that notification that they have a new message, they know that they're going to be signing in and seeing something relevant to their education. That means that advertisements or untargeted messages are discouraged. Now let's look at sending a message using MySJSU. After you sign in, once you have access, you can scroll down in the menu and find the Send Messages option. By default, it thinks you want to search for messages that you've already sent. At any time, you can click this search button and see previous messages, including messages that have been sent, unsent, expired, and archived. However, let's go ahead and add a new value. Now we can see the Send Message page. As you can see, there are 4 methods by which we can send messages: List, Upload SJSU IDs, Class Roster, and by Instructor. We'll start with the List method. You may want to start by changing the From line. If you're sending a message to many students, you may not want them all to contact you if they have questions, so you can change this to whatever you like. Secondly, make sure you have your correct type selected. We'll leave the To line until last. For now, put in your subject, and next put in your message text. Be cautious at this point. If you spend a long time composing your message while signed into PeopleSoft, PeopleSoft may sign out before you have a chance to complete and send your message, causing you to lose all your work. It may be a good idea to compose your message beforehand in a word processor. However, if you do this, please note that word processors include many special characters that will not translate properly when you paste them into this field. The message will still look okay, but when you send it, any special characters, such as symbols or smart quotes, will be translated into question marks, which will make your message look very unprofessional. This does need to be plain text. To get around that, you can either right-click when you paste and select Paste as Plain Text, or you can run your message through a text cleaner. Any of these tools will allow you to paste in text and clean up formatting so that it becomes plain text suitable for messaging. Maybe the easiest way to get around this problem is simply to compose your message in a plain text editor, such as Notepad, to begin with. Remember that your message has to be plain text, which means that no links can be clicked. If you want to include a clickable link to a web page, possibly one that includes downloadable attachments that you would not otherwise be able to include in your message, you can type them into the URL fields here. Note that you do need the HTTP prefix. Finally, an expiration date is required for every message. After the expiration date passes, this message will no longer be visible to the students. You can click the calendar to select your expiration date. In general, it's a good idea to set that expiration date to maybe 2 or 3 days after the information is no longer relevant. This way, the student does not have a message show up giving them outdated information, but still has a couple days to see that they missed the deadline. Finally, let's look at the To field. The list method of messaging is a little quirky in that you cannot use SJSU IDs, you need to use user IDs, and in PeopleSoft these are distinct. Prior to fall 2005, every student was issued what was called a W ID. This ID replaced the first 2 zeros of the student's SJSU ID with a capital W, like this. How do you know if a student has a W ID or an SJSU ID? In general, you don't. So if you're not sure, it's better not to use this method. However, any ID that is above about 005230001 is going to be an SJSU ID only, and you can feel safe using it in this method. IDs that are below that number may be a W ID and may not be. It can be hard to tell. When filling out the To field, you can enter up to 10 user IDs separated by commas. Be sure not to include spaces between the commas and the IDs. I've included a number of IDs here. Once you're satisfied with your To list, your From, Subject, Message Text, URLs, and expiration date, you can click the Send button. We get a confirmation that the message was sent successfully. Now I can click the Return to SJ Messaging to see the message that I just sent, including date, time, my From line, my subject, message text, URLs, and expiration date. Let's see how this looks to the student. After a message has been sent, the student on the Student Center will be able to see any messages they have. In this case, Rhiannon can see the message I just sent. You have one new message. She can click View Messages to see that message. Here are the list of messages she's received. And I can click on the message to view the message detail. After reading it from the message list, that student can delete the message. If a student ever accidentally does delete a message that they want to keep, they can open a ticket to the help desk letting them know their SJSU ID and approximate time that the message was received so that we can restore it. We will not, however, restore any message that has expired. Suppose you realize suddenly that the message that you sent contained an error and you want to withdraw it. You can unsend the message by going to Send Messages, searching to find the message that you sent, and clicking the Unsend button. However, note, if someone has already read that message, you'll get this somewhat peculiar error message. Warning, recipients have read the message you are trying to unsend. To unsend this message, press OK. To not unsend this message, press Cancel. What that means is, if you want to unsend that message, click OK. If you've changed your mind, press Cancel. We'll go ahead and unsend the message here. However, since I know that someone read this message, maybe I want to see who that is. To view your message recipients, go to your main menu and find the View Message Recipients link. By default, it will pull up the message recipients for the last message that I worked with. On the View Message Recipients page, I can see the status of everyone that I've sent a message to. Most importantly, I can see that Ryan T. Campbell has read this message on March 18th, and I can see the specific time as well. I can see 2 other students that I've sent this message to, but neither of them have read it yet. And finally, I have this ID over here that does not match up to an SJSU ID or a name. That means that this ID was not a valid ID, and I probably want to review my information and make sure I've sent the message to everyone that I was hoping to. Let's look at some of the other ways to send messages. If you've recently sent a message, when you first return to the SJSU messaging page and try to send a new message, by default you'll be told the value you tried to add already exists. You just need to clear out this date and time, and then click Add. Now we can send our next message. Let's look at the By Instructor method. The By Instructor method of sending messages sends a message to every student that has a class with that instructor. This can be helpful, for example, if the instructor wants to list their office hours, or if they will be taking an extended leave, or if they want to publish their exam schedule. I fill out my from line, my subject, my message text, any URLs that I want, and an expiration date. The next thing I need is that instructor's SJSU ID. I also need to put in the current term code and click Populate. The first of the list of students will appear below. I can click View 100 to view at least 100 of them at a time, or I can search for any particular name to find that particular student. Once I'm happy with the list, I can click Send. The message was sent successfully. Now let's look at sending a message using the class roster method. I'll clear out my date time created, click Add, and this time I'll select Class Roster. Enter the current term in the term field, and the class number if you know it. If you don't know it, you can look it up. The fields you'll probably most care about will be subject area and catalog number. However, note that when searching for catalog number, you should change begins with to contains. Otherwise, you may not find your results. Select the class you want, and then click Populate. Now we have our list of students in this class. However, if we send this message right now, it won't go out to any of these students. We can select any of those students that we want to send to, deselect all, or select all and remove one or two. Click Send when you're satisfied. The message was sent successfully. Now let's look at the final method for sending messages in MySJSU. And this method is Upload SJSU IDs. Before you can send your message using the upload method, you'll need to have a file ready with a list of the IDs of the students you want to send a message to. You may start with an Excel file, something that looks like this. Here you can see we have our first column, including a list of SJSU IDs, and no other data. If there is other data in other columns or rows, it is technically okay. The system will ignore anything it does not recognize as a valid SJSU ID. However, I find it's better to keep this file clean. Note that my SJSU IDs in this first column have their leading zeros. Excel has a nasty habit of stripping those zeros away. So if you find that it's doing this, you may need to select your column, right-click, go to Format Cells, and tell it you want a custom field, and the type should be 9 zeros. This will fill in any missing digits at the beginning with those zeros. Once we have our Excel file looking the way we want it, we need to save it as text. So we'll go to File, Save As. We'll give it a recognizable name. And if you are on a PC, you'll want to choose Text MS-DOS. If you're on a Mac, you'll choose Text Windows. You can click OK to ignore the warning that appears. And yes. Back on our messaging screen, click Upload and choose File. Now find the file that you uploaded and click Open and Upload. It may take a while to load the file. You can upload any number of students' IDs using this method. However, if you have more than 5,000 in a file, we request that you split up the message into multiple groups. This is so that sending the message does not slow down the system too much. The page updates with the student information, showing the first student in the list. We can view all, or click Find to see if any single student made it on that list. Once you're satisfied, you can click Send and return to SJ Messaging to see the message that you sent. I hope this session was informative. If you have further questions about sending messages using MySJSU Messaging, you can contact the IT Help Desk at ithelpdesk@sjsu.edu or by dialing 41530. To request access, you'll need to fill out an access request form. You can find those by going to MySJSU, Employees, Forms, and filling out the system access request. In addition, you will also need to fill out the messaging usage guidelines and form. This lets you know what sorts of messages are acceptable and the intent of the system. It requires a simple signature at the bottom. Thank you and have a nice day.